And the purpose of today's session is to improve the understanding of consultants of the Major Works Design Package submission form. Our aim is to have you submit a design package that enables upfront approval or at most minimal information request. We introduced the form to help consultants understand the most critical elements that we need addressed for an efficient design assessment. We had mixed responses before the form was created. Submissions now received generally provide a more consistent response. This reduces the time we are required to review the application, and that's a win for everyone. We just need everyone to be on the same page. So we're also going to explain why requirements are mandatory, how to reduce delays, and how to address each component of the form. The form's not applicable to minor works as defined in the NetServe plan, nor to complex works. Complex works generally involve electrical instrumentation and control and mechanical engineering aspects, but there's some managerial discretion to include trunk main works as well. So its purpose is to ensure that you provide a more efficient service during the design stage of assessment for major works applications, to ensure all critical information for design assessment is included with the initial design package submission, and to ensure that the certified design aligns with the code requirements and water approval conditions. We can achieve the purpose better if the major works form is treated as a checklist as part of the consultant's design QA process. Please don't make it a quick tick and flick afterwards. The consultant QA should naturally address many other design requirements of the QA of the SEQ code, and these may be separately called up by Urban Utilities in an information request. So this is not a comprehensive form. Obviously, it should be clear to everyone. So some guidance notes on page 1 of the form. Please ensure that all required information is submitted to the portal. If you're unclear about any particular requirement, give us a quick phone call. But if you want a more detailed discussion, please request a design service advice notice. This is an option before lodgement or during the design assessment period. An extension of time to respond to an information request can be requested if required and will be considered. This is fairly straightforward. The application number is the same as the one assigned for the water approval. Please ensure that you've placed the application number in the subject of any emails or other correspondence to us. This helps us deal with your file more quickly, because we deal with many applications, and it'll save us time if you do. Otherwise, it'll cause delays in processing your application. The contact person on this page may be different to the RPEQ who certifies this form. Now, moving now to section 3, you'll note that it's headed preliminary review. We use it to identify the majority of issues up front, but then we'll also carry out a more detailed review. Your response to these criteria may determine whether your application will be accepted, refused, or a request for further information is issued. They don't, as I said before, they don't replace the need to comply with water approval conditions or with other statutory and policy provisions. Note that your design must be code compliant, regardless of whether our approval has picked up a non-compliance or not. Should our compliance team pick up a discrepancy during the construction phase or when we review as constructed information, you will be required to fix it, and this may delay construction or require reconstruction at your cost. Section 3.1, preliminary review details. You'll note that all the items on the screen now are in bold text. If any one of them is not addressed or is incorrect, your application can be refused. I'll now expand on each item in turn. For item 3.1.1, it's clear that if your design does not comply with the water approval, it may may end up with a refusal, or it may end up with requiring a new water approval. Any inconsistency in your design with the water approval may affect the ability of the network to deliver our standard of service and would require amendment to the water approval. Therefore, the design wouldn't be approved. Moving to 3.1.2. There's been a variety of responses to 3.1.2 by various consultants, and just to be clear, we need to have the name of the RPEQ in full on the drawing, not just the signature. And for any future issues, this is for any future issues with the design or construction, because the privacy statement on the board's professional engineer's site states that if the arrangement with if the board ceases, all personal information will be destroyed. We need to know the RPEQ, we need to have the RPEQ date their signature too, because this ensures that they're signing the latest revision of the drawing. I've seen submissions with the revisions dated after the date the RPEQ has signed the drawing, and this clearly renders the RPE signature invalid, because I must assume that the RPEQ has not viewed that revision. Moving to 3.1.3. Urban utilities will not accept items not on the IPAM list. These have been verified for suitability on our network. On to 3.1.4, concerning evidence of permission by the landowner. Access permission is a legal requirement, and if we don't get that, it could result in action against urban utilities. So this approval is normally attained at water approval stage, but we check it at design stage. 3.1.5. If you have non-conformances, they need to be identified in this form. The purpose of the code is to ensure that we have a safe network, achieving the required design life to minimise long-term costs to urban utilities, including operation, maintenance, and replacement costs. That's why we want conforming designs. 3.1.6. Now, this item is a continuing problem for us. We often see consultants not submitting geotechnical data with the design submission, and this could lead to your refusal of your application straight away, just on this point alone. Trench design must mitigate migratory soil and ensure that the trench bed has adequate bearing strength. Also, for deep trenches, you need to provide the native soil modulus to determine whether a higher class of pipe is required. If you refer to Appendix I of the Sewerage Code, it explains the situation there. Anything deeper than what's shown in that appendix will require you to provide a native soil modulus test result. You can also refer to the pipe trench design advice notes that's now on our website for further explanation. Buried services, and this is also a critical issue. Dial Before You Dig provides a snapshot in time based on previous as constructed information. So subsequent construction can supersede it, even between the design and construction phases. A preliminary design that assumes the accuracy of Dial Before You Dig information must always be verified by potholing. Not doing so may result in significant redesign that will then require approval of an amended design during the construction period, and design review by urban utilities may delay construction then by up to 20 business days. You should also note that there can be a significant delay between when we receive ASCONs and our uploading of it to the GIS. A couple of examples of problems that we've experienced with consultants in this area. We had an approved design. The contractor couldn't find the manhole. The design was based on the GIS, which was out of date. Another example, in Brisbane City, the consultant wanted a second incidentally non-compliant internal drop in what GIS identified as a G-type manhole. That would not be approved anyway. But after the consultant decided to check on site, he found that it was actually an F-type manhole. So just be careful, actually go and do your checks on site. It's not good enough to just rely on GIS or ASCON information, please. And we'll continue on with the non-bold items. We often find in 3.1.8, we often find that certification by a structural RPEQ is not provided. A civil RPEQ can't certify a structure unless they meet the board requirements associated with registration before the 1st of July 2008. Failure to provide such certification may delay approval, or approval will be required later through the build over access assessment, build over asset assessment. A network access permit won't be granted unless the BOA has been approved. However, you can provide standard details, provided they're certified by a structural RPEQ to facilitate approval. You know, a standard detail that's applicable to more than one job is fine. We've got an example, a couple of examples here as well. We've had a example submitted that with a detail showing that it's suitable for a DN600 and larger pipe. Now, clearly, it's unacceptable just to say DN600 and larger because we don't know how large. So you need to specify how much larger. You need to specify the actual sizes that it's applicable to. The second example is that we have issues with people disputing whether an RC slab is a structure. Well, an RC slab spanning a trench is a structure. It's obviously doing a job. It's spanning a trench. Moving on to 3.1.9. This should be fairly simple. Really, all it really means is that you need to provide a stub for a sewage manhole or an end-of-line ductfoot fire hydrant with a valve for a water main. Generally, we don't have problems with that. Usually people are pretty right. 3.1.10. Drawing presentation. Ensure notes are up to date. Someone got their mic not muted. Can you please mute your mics? Ensure notes are up to date. We often see superseded and incorrect notes or notes are missing. And then the risk is that the contractor doesn't build compliant works, and then the compliance team will not certify the work, and then you won't get your approvals to proceed to pre-start. Example here is where we have often seen in the past where the design RPEQ attempts to shift responsibility for geotech to the contractor. We won't accept geotech not provided unless it's provided with the design package. Providing it with the construction is too late. It may affect the design, and therefore you end up with a potential design review, design amendment, and 20-day business day delay in approvals. So that's going to hold up your contractor. Another issue there is for that particular item is that all line types and symbols shown on the drawing should be identified in the legend. And please differentiate existing from proposed assets clearly. Proposed should be dark, bold. Going to 3.11. Another item that's just about drawing presentation really, but often missing is the locality plan. We need a locality plan and a drawing index at the first drawing in the set, and this requirement is per clause 411 and 416 of the SEQ Code Asset Information Specification. Please read that. And generally per standard drawings 1100-2 in both water and sewage codes. And avoid use of photos and images because they can create large files unnecessarily, and that increases handling time by reviewers and could delay your response. And we need to provide separate water and sewage locality plans and drawing indices to comply with the standard drawing requirements. Ensure that they are the first drawing in the set. Also perform item 3.1.11. As I said before, proposed work should be bold to differentiate existing from proposed. 3.1.12. Approvals. This is often comes up as an issue with the councils. What people tend to do is put sewers or water mains on the opposite side of the drawing, on the opposite side of the road from where council permits it, or they put them both on the same side. Not all councils approve that. So where you are working with a particular council, just check their standard drawings to make sure that you are compliant with their requirements about where you place the service in their verge. And if you are not compliant with the council requirements, you need to submit written evidence from them to us saying that they agree to your non-standard alignment. And again, that will save time for approval if you submit it with the application. Otherwise, it could take a long time and delay your approval. And the same applies to the items 3.1.13 and 3.1.14. Note also that when you do place water mains and sewers on the same side of the road, that can affect clearances between the water and the sewer. So you need to check that your clearances are okay per the code, tables 5.4 and 5.5 in the water and sewer. Going on to 3.1.13, as I said, previous item, there is potential for delays, and for main roads, particularly if it's within state-controlled road corridor, and there are restrictions on what it permits within its corridor, and also it's very restricted on what it permits within limited access roads. So you need to do your due diligence on that first before you apply for your water approval. (3.1.14), again, that's in the case of Queensland Rail. You'll have a great potential for delays when proposing within their properties. Construction within QR reserves is not acceptable other than perpendicular crossings without fittings, valves or manholes, because we have limited access to QR property, and QR particularly has restrictions on what we can do, and there are problems if there's an emergency in responding to that emergency. So we need to avoid that. We need to avoid any works within QR property if at all possible. Moving to 3.1.15. Particularly for AC pipes, we have a concern that because of the contaminated nature of AC pipes, it warrants replacement collar to collar, and we require that in all cases for water or pressure pipe. For sewers, we will consider the remaining design life of the AC pipe unless it's under a proposed road, and then it must be removed from under the road and replaced. On to 3.1.16. We spoke about BOA requirements before, but if there's insufficient detail in the BOA, or if the design is not certified by a structural RPEQ, it will be rejected. The BOA is assessed separately under the Water Supply Safety and Reliability Act 2008. 3.1.18. Electrical pillars. This is also an issue that pops up repeatedly. We need you to show the location of the electrical pillars so that it ensures that they don't conflict with the location of water meters. Code requirements on separation from water meters from electrical pillars apply. 3.2.1, we're moving on to water reticulation infrastructure, particular requirements. You note there's 4 bold items here as well. In 3.2.1, for water mains, very temporary easements may be permitted, such as where they are required in the interim before the next stage of a development that will be constructed soon afterwards. This code requirement facilitates operational access, which is usually required at very short notice when there is a pipe burst emergency. That's why we require it. 3.2.2. This is also a common item that pops up just about every job we look at. You need to ensure that the fire hydrant locations fully comply with clause 8.8, and please read it. Particularly note subclauses 8.8.3, 8.8.8, 8.8.10, 8.8.11. Coverage is one aspect which generally is now treated properly, but there are also other aspects that are not treated as well, such as that hydrants need to be placed at all high and low points. Fire hydrants are required for scouring and air release on reticulation. We don't use scours on reticulation on mains. We only use them on mains larger than 250 OD PE. You need to think like an operator. Fire hydrants are needed uphill where closed valves are present for scouring. At high points, they allow air entry or air release, and that allows main emptying and filling. 3.2.3 concerning valves. We do require valves, but avoid excessive location of valves. We need them at future connection points. Think like a contractor here. Placement of valves can be problematic where stages are not properly programmed or are changed. Think about the shut plans, think about programming works for adjacent stages. Clearly, it's more commonly a problem with staged construction. 3.2.4, this item particularly has come up recently where large water meters are not adequately provided. You need to consider potential future separate tenancies, such as for multiple unit developments combined with retail space. We had recently had a high rise with a proposed retail space in it. And what happens, and what we've experienced in the past, is that body corporates later sell off the retail tenancy, and without a separate supply, we can't charge the retail tenancy. So we are insisting on a separate main meter for each different type of tenancy. So you have the tenants have a main meter for the retail, a main meter for the multiple unit development, and then sub meters for each of the dwellings within the multiple unit development. And that's apart from community title schemes, which is covered in the code as well, and covered by the Body Corporate and Community Management Act 1997. And they only require a single supply pipe. Going on to 3.2.6, end of line arrangements and pipe restraint details are provided, including arrangement for any future extension. Specific details are required to ensure constructability of future extensions. Now on to wastewater specific infrastructure items. 3.3.1. For maintenance structures, particularly note the requirements of section 7.3 and table 7.1 concerning their location and suitability. These requirements are necessary to facilitate maintenance activities. On to 3.3.2, structure type and class. Please note, and this is generally conformed to, that all manhole aspirators, so it's the underside of the slab on top of the manhole, must have PE lining underneath for corrosion prevention. That's been a serious cause for concern for our operators, because corroded aspirators are a serious safety concern if they fail. and we don't know if there's no lining underneath, they could fail at any time. Note clause 762, where PE lining is required generally in manholes, and clause 5.6.6.6, where PE lining can be used to mitigate the effect of hydraulic jumps. On to 3.3.3. I know that normally people will design to minimum grade. Now, as a design engineer, you should consider whether a steeper grade than the minimum can be achieved to meet the velocity criterion in the design guidelines, which is 0.7 meters per second. Where feasible, self-cleansing is a code requirement and reduces the need for operators to clear blockages. So if you can get it steeper, please try. On to 3.3.4. Restrictions on connection depths are there basically for safety reasons, particularly for the safety of drainers working on private connections. Non-compliances to this item cannot be justified on the basis of cost. We won't accept cost as the basis for justifying a non-compliance. Non-bolt items. So we've got 3.3.6. Catchment plan isn't required if you've already provided it with the water approval, unless the catchment has changed since. You must allow in your design for any upstream area that could in future connect to your subdivision. You must demonstrate in your design how your design will be able to control and provide adequate capacity for that external upstream catchment. And you can show that, combine it with your locality plan. 3.3.7. Note that there's a requirement for easements to access maintenance structures. Clearance and easement extent on the structure must also comply with MP 1.4. Easements over the entire sewer length are only necessary for sewers larger than 300 nominal bore per clause item 5.2.8. Now, 3.3.8, property connections. You can compare this to the requirements at item 3.3.4. Going to 3.3.9, show control levels for the most remote corner of each lot. That concludes the section on that section 3. Now we can move on to sections 4 for details of non-compliance. Now, I've seen a number of occasions where consultants have submitted this form and they've used it as a transmittal form. It's not a transmittal form. It's meant to show only non-compliances, non-conformances to the code. So as you can see in this example, I've shown an example in here. Let's say you've got a series longitudinal section. You've only got one potential non-conformance, and you say that you refer to the drawing number. The revision is the drawing number and the revision of the drawing, and the author is the consultant's name of the RPEQ. You cross out what's not applicable. So in this case, it's a series longitudinal section. So you cross out drinking water and recycled water. So that's the identification of the non-conformance. And then you go to this section, next section along 4.2, and you explain where your non-conformance exists. So you need to refer to the SEQ code clause there. And details of proposed variation, what you're proposing to do. So in this case, let's say you wanted to reduce the horizontal clearance to the manhole. The proposed solution is to ensure the water main is joint free for at least 1 metre past each edge of manholes, which we've been permitting. So the reason why you've required it is because you need to have the sewer on the same side of the road as the water reticulation due to site constraints. So that's the sort of thing we expect from you when you have a non-conformance, and you need to show that on the form, not on the drawings, and you need to get it up front, because if we have to then go looking for it it's either an information request or a refusal. Yeah, while we're on that subject too, one issue that continually crops up is obstructions and clearances in table 5.4 of the Water Code and 5.4 of the Sewerage Code, particularly clearances from stormwater. Unfortunately, there does not seem to be any coordination with stormwater designers. If this was discussed in the stormwater design pre-start meeting, in many cases, compliance could be achieved with minimal lowering of the stormwater pipes. We're only talking a few hundred millimetres. If you have a pre-design start meeting with the designers of the stormwater, you could raise that as an issue. One recent case where I was presented with 7 up and overs of a water main over stormwater, and it's just disgraceful. In three of those cases, we were able to say, well, it's not necessary because we can get adequate clearance. We try to avoid that in all cases. Right. Declaration. This is where the RPEQ signs off, stating that everything in the form is correct. As the RPEQ take responsibility for the content of the form, we trust that you take an active role in discussing its contents with the person who completes it to ensure that it's correct before you sign it. Urban Utilities has the option of referring RPEQs to the Board of Professional Engineers for signing a form that they know to be incorrect. So, as we discussed in conclusion, the purpose is to submit a design package that requires minimal requests for information and reduces the review time so that approvals can be issued quickly. Please help us to help you. And a reminder that we'll have this on the website by close of business, and the link will be shared in the Consultant and Contractor Connect newsletter. It's time now for the Q&A. I'll ask Erin to handle this. Thanks, Erin.
Okay, thank you very much, Frank, for leading us through the session. I hope everybody has found it useful today to get that extra detail on the requirements of the forms. We've got a panel of engineers ready to take some questions from our participants. I see we've got one there so far in the chat, which is wonderful. We'll jump straight into that. But first, if you have a further inquiry where you would like a bit more clarification, please pop it there in the chat, and we'll work through as many as we can before we finish up today. So, Frank, I hope you had a chance to have a sip of water and regain your voice. There's a question there from M. Olive, and the question is, are there any instances where Urban Utilities will undertake works associated with a sewer connection in adjoining land without the owner's consent? So I throw that to you, Frank, or Sajid Syed, who I see is in the top
I can
there.
answer that question, Erin. So there are 2 types of work we do: emergency works and non-emergency works. And for emergency works, we have a power to go to owners or anybody's land in emergency situation where sewer is overflowing or water main is bursting or anything. But for non-emergency works, we normally go through that owner's consent ourselves. So we don't have any emergency or any power to go and work on the neighbor's land without having consent from the neighbor. Or third one, or we have to go through the compulsory acquisition process. The first step of that process is also basically talking to the neighbor. So to clarify the answer to your question, in emergency situation, yes, we have power to go to neighbor's land and do the work, but in non-emergency situation, no, we don't.
Okay, That's all. Sajid, on that one?
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay. Hope that answered the question for you. Is there anybody else that would like to throw a question into the chat? A question specific to the items on the form? Hopefully that means, Frank, you did a wonderful job of explaining everything.
I've actually got a question.
Is it okay? Sorry to interrupt. Is it okay if you, after you share your question with us, you also type it into the chat?
Yeah, I'll send it in right now, actually. It's regarding item 3.1.6, specifically the geotechnical item within the certification form. Now, I guess the query from our point of view is the upfront requirement at the design process and why it actually is sort of required. And the reason I'm asking that is because when we end up doing the testing, it just gets done for sort of isolated locations. And while the Geotech RPQ is certifying that, it sort of doesn't give an accurate representation of the full length of sewer. We're finding that it's costing the contractors and the developers money to do it twice, because obviously during the works they're going to confirm it as well. So I guess my overall summary of the question is there a reason why it can't be confirmed during construction when they actually have the trenches open, and why it is an upfront requirement from urban utilities?
As far as design goes, when you do a design, you are assuming certain things. Otherwise, if you don't have geotech, probably the first thing I should say to you is you should refer to the trench design advice note on the website.
Mm-hmm.
That will tell you why we require it.
Mm-hmm.
But the issue is if you've done a design, what we tend to see is if people haven't done the geotech up front, they'll say use type 3 or type C, and unless otherwise confirmed or whatever. So what happens is that then the contractor will go and do his building. He just looks at the drawing and says, "Oh, I don't have to have geotech in here." So he just goes ahead and proceeds with the design, with the construction based on a faulty design. The issue is also fairly important for where you've got deep sewers or deep water mains.
Yeah.
Where you still need to find out the native soil modulus, and that will determine what class of pipe you're actually using. So you can't just assume that you can use type 21 on the sewer all the time, because if it's deep, it may well require, and it has required in a lot of cases that I've dealt with, a higher class of pipe.
Yep.
But as far as doing the geotech in advance, also we need to know it should not be an onerous requirement. It should be just an issue of doing representative tests, and we don't need to have tests done during construction phase if you've done representative tests along the line of the proposed service. So if you've done a test at point A at the start of the job, and point C at the end of the job, and point C in the middle, and you find that the results are fairly close, then we're happy with that. We don't need to have 1,000 tests all over the place. As long as you can say that they're representative. It's when you come with different results, significantly different results, such as if you've got silty clay at one end and then you've got sand in the middle somewhere, then we need to have more information. It's just basically a professional judgment by the geotechnical engineer about how many tests he requires to be done. So it may only say, as I said, it may only need 3 tests of the whole site during the design phase, and then you don't need to do anything during construction phase, because you've already identified that the geotechnical engineer has already identified that there is not expected to be anything different. Should something turn up while the contractor is building the actual trench, then he goes back to the RPQ anyway. So that's how you should deal with it.
Yeah, I guess if I can just follow up on that, look, relevant point for deep trenching, but for instances where we have trenching, I don't know, within 1 to 2 meters deep, is there a reason why we can't propose a type 4 embedment and then have that confirmed throughout construction and provide it sort of progressively to urban utilities during the construction process, as well as with the as constructed package perhaps at the end of the project?
Yeah, you can propose type 4, which deals with the dispersive index issue.
Yep.
But what's wrong with just doing some representative DCPs? So you can go do a DCP to the depth of the proposed trench, and a very simple test. I've done it myself. It doesn't take very long. And do a few representative DCPs, and that will determine whether your trench bed is more than 50 kPa strength. That's I don't see what the problem is with that.
Yep. Okay. No, that's fine. Thanks, Frank.
And
Thank-
there is a related
thank-
question, Aaron, on the bottom of that, that from Matthew Lewis for the same topic. Do you want me to answer that, Aaron?
If it's related,
Yeah, it's
and you
related,
think it's important to talk about that now, yes?
Yeah. So what he's saying, like the question in certain circumstances, developer is not eager to undertake potholing and would refer to assume the risk of redesign delays, etc. Will urban utility insist on upfront potholing in this instance? I answer say yes, because by that time, when you come for redesign, everything is open and the contractor is on site, and then everything become urgent. And basically then, okay, because everything is happening on site so frequently and so quickly, we need to respond quickly. We don't want to get to that situation. That's why we insist that geotech to be done upfront, so that we don't have to have redesign or redelays. And it costs both sides. It costs urban utilities time and money to reassess the entire design again. And it costs more money to the developer at that point to paying off the contractor every day till we respond to them. So the answer is yes, we still insist that it has to be done upfront. Thanks, Aaron.
Okay, thanks, Sajid. And Matthew, I hope that answered your question there at the bottom of the chat. There was one higher up from P Hyde at JFP. Sajid or Frank, could you respond to what the extent of changes required for a water approval before it needs a revised water approval?
I can answer that one. Okay, so there are two different approvals we are talking about. Water approval is the intent to connect, and design approval is a condition of the water approval, which you submitting a design to meet the water approval requirements. Now, when you are submitting the water approval, I assume that you are sure that what you are going to build. So there might not be much change between your water approval and the design approval. If I say, if I put a limit on that, okay, this is the change, then it becomes like just a talk, because we can't put any limit. Okay, what is the change we accept? You might say, okay, with that alignment or with the diameter or with that anything which change from water approval to design, will we accept it? I can't answer that because it has to be case to case basis. Sometimes the change might be very minor, but sometimes even the changing a pipe diameter can make that infrastructure from non-trunk to trunk. So for example, like initially you decided 180 pipe, and then suddenly you say, no, in the design approval, I'm from 180 pipe, I'm putting 250. So you start going in the trunk range of the design. That's why it needs to go back to the water approval to fix all those components up before it comes to design. Is that the answer? I think that's the answer to that question. But if you have any follow up, I'm happy to answer that follow up as well.
Okay, thanks, Sajid. Just to recap, of course, we will be putting responses to these questions on our website this afternoon, along with a recording of the session. We've got another question there from Ivan. Frank, this one's to you. Could you please repeat your comment regarding stormwater crossings and expand a little bit for our audience?
Yeah, stormwater crossings are a major drama, often with applications that we receive. What we're experiencing is that the clearances between the stormwater pipe is too shallow for us to get adequate clearances and still get the cover that we require for our water mains. That's the key issue. I know that you know, the council approval will have design. We'll look at roads and drainage design, and unfortunately, at that early stage, they don't look at water and sewage. It would be very helpful for the designers of roads and drainage to get together with the designers of water and sewage to make sure that there's no conflicts. Yeah, there have to be some occasions where the conflict will occur, but the primary goal should be to have no conflicts at all. Maybe one or two where it crosses a road, but that's where the problem lies. Is as I said during the meeting, I had this one occasion where there's seven conflicts. Surely we can do better than that.
Okay, I'll take that as your final response to that one, Frank.
Yep.
Okay, looks like we've got one more question that's just popped up there from Ivan. In the interest of finishing on time today, we will take this as our last question. But again, if you have any further questions after the session, please feel free to send them through to us. So, Frank, what's your stance with PE when going under stormwater, I guess? SW.
I prefer to use non-jointed steel cement line pipe in case if we're going under, for safety reasons, for the reason that we don't have to then, we have limited, it's going to limit whether we ever have to come back to that site later on. So it's not a hard and fast rule, and some engineers will. It depends on the circumstances of what's involved, but you know, particularly if you've got larger stormwater pipes, you don't want to have to mess around with it later during operational phase of the asset.
Okay, thank you very much again, Frank. To everybody who's joined us today, thank you for your time. I hope it's been a valuable exercise. I hope you've learnt some new things that will help you in preparation of the design form. For now, we're going to wrap it up. Again, send through any additional questions you have, and you'll find all of this on the website this afternoon. And also we'll put a link in our next edition of the Consultant and Contractor Connect. If you're not signed up to our monthly e-newsletter, you can do so online or just reach out to us and we'll be able to point you in the right direction so that you can become a subscriber. On that note, thank you everybody, and we look forward to having you join us at a future session just like this. Have a great day.